Welcome everyone to the American Carp podcast, where we discuss all things carp related in the USA, featuring anglers' interviews, stories and monthly competitions with traditional US and Euro anglers, fly anglers and anyone who has a passion for this incredible fish, the carp, Cyprinus carpio. Much maligned and misunderstood, and undoubtedly one of the finest sport fish to be targeted here in the USA. This is where we, the guilty ones, can meet. My name is Sean Manning of the American Carp Society, and I'm grateful to be your host. Welcome everybody. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already, and share with your friends. Today our guest is an angler that we've been watching pretty closely over the past year. He's been dedicated to furthering the sport here in the USA and has a very unique story that he's going to share with us today. An American Carp Society member and friend of the show, Mr. Dan Ketterman. Dan, thanks for joining me on the show, bud. I appreciate you spending the time here.
Thanks, Sean, for having me. I'm truly humbled and honored to get to be a part of the podcast today.
Yeah, this will be great. We've got some really interesting things that we're going to be going through for the listeners. Now, the first question I have for you is the traditional first question. How long have you actually been fishing for carp for rod on rod and line here in the United States? Because they're not the most popular fish, obviously. So how long have you been actively fishing for them for?
Well, I think this is going to be a common theme for our time today, but it's a complicated answer. I originally started fishing for carp. I would say there was a summer of my senior year in high school where me and a few friends got onto them and thought it was the greatest thing ever. But I would say now as an adult, I started relatively not too long ago, June of 2020.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That is relatively is a relatively short time. Now, I know you're from Ohio, and there's some beautiful fish that have come out of Ohio. Were you raised there? Is that where you're from originally, or? Yeah,
born and bred. I'm originally from Springfield, Ohio, which is kind of in between Dayton and Columbus, and
right.
I'm the black sheep in my family. I moved 2 hours north. I'm the only one to really leave Springfield and live up around Toledo, Ohio now.
That's funny. You broke out. You moved that 2 hours north.
Right.
Obviously, I'm presuming you're a multi-species angler to start with, like most people, right? Do you still target other species, or is it primarily carp now?
Primarily carp now, since I live, right off of Lake Erie. We do a few perch trips a year, and then through my neck of the woods, we have the walleye run. So we'll get out there and try to target some walleye every once in a while. But for the most part, yeah, I'm primarily targeting carp now.
Yeah. And walleye, they're very similar to what we call zander in the UK, which is kind of like a perch pike sort of hybrid type of thing, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. A little sharper teeth than the carp that we're targeting.
Yeah. Yeah. And are you fishing primarily lakes up there, or is it rivers?
So we have, Lake Erie, and then off of Lake Erie, we have the Maumee River where I'm at. So it's a pretty big water system, river there. But then there's a bunch of park lakes that we have around that I've been trying to get after.
Okay.
It's a little bit of everything.
Okay. Now, then they're not the most, as we said, popular species. So how did you actually get introduced to them as a species? Was there an angler or a friend that was already targeting them on rod and line, or how did you hear about them?
Yeah, I as a young child, I grew up, I think, fishing as early as I can remember. Some of my earliest memories are, at a lake fishing with my grandfather and my mother. And, I remember my grandfather, hooking into a carp at one point, and man, it seemed like he was a big man, and it seemed like he actually struggled to get that thing in. And then I remember the first time that I hooked into one when I was in high school.
Yeah.
I was with a few friends, and man, the fight was like nothing I had experienced before. So yeah, that was kind of my first. It was all by chance. We were float fishing. I think we might have even, been using worms, and caught one on a float.
And then everything changes after that, doesn't it? You kind of get that experience with that fish, and then catching a catfish or a little bass or something afterwards, it's never really the same, is it?
Right. Every bluegill I just think, oh yeah, wasn't quite what the carp lived up to. And
yeah.
I'd been experiencing that, for 20 years, thinking back to the first carp that I had caught. Every fish since was kind of always measured up to a carp. Yeah.
Now, you put a lot of work in this last year or so. I mean, you've been very dedicated. You've been out there, doing what you do. Would you say, since the year or so that you've been really sort of looking at it seriously, what would you say is the biggest change in your approach now as opposed to when you started a year or so ago? Because obviously, as we go through things, we learn. We learn in different approaches and experiences. Is there anything that you look back now that you've changed significantly since you first started?
Well, I think the biggest thing for me, I'm always willing to learn, and I think I'm a high school rugby coach, and that's one thing that I try to instill in my players. Like, if you're coachable, you can change and grow your game. And I think I've tried to take that aspect into carp angling as well. Always trying to learn, whether that's through the internet or articles I'm reading. And I originally started just with a can of sweet corn straight on the hook. It's about as simple as you could get. So I mean, I would say evolved and changed a bunch from that. But I'm also, I think, being willing to be taught by just about anyone. Me being new to carp angling, I feel like I take a unique perspective and a skill set that maybe you wouldn't have growing up fishing for carp. And I think I still have something to bring to the table. So there are younger anglers that, man, if they have a unique perspective on things, I want to hear what they have to say in hopes that I'm able to catch more fish that way.
That's awesome, man. And you mentioned something which is so important in any area of life. You have to be coachable, because the way that you grow and you get outside of the current skill set or the current results that, that one is getting in any area of life is to break outside of that. It's just to be coachable and learn, to move forward. Now, do you have any particular favorite venues up there that you fish? Are there park lakes or anything specific? Do you have a favorite water up there, or?
Yeah, so I almost feel guilty even talking about this, given the cold weather that we're just kind of coming out of. We have a warm water discharge up here.
Wonderful.
Out of a power plant. So I fished that all winter. It never froze completely. The water sat anywhere between 50 to 42 degrees pretty much all winter, even when it's negative, temperatures outside. So that's been the spot that me and a few friends have fished a lot. But as it's warmed up, other anglers are out there now. So we kind of avoid it in the warm months, and we'll get out there when it's cold.
Oh yeah, that would definitely be the place where they're going to be warming themselves and sitting and that type of thing. Now, can you tell us what's your approach as an angler now? If you're approaching a brand new water that you've never fished before and you don't know anything about it, how do you prepare for that personally? What goes through your mind, when you're approaching a new water?
Again, me trying to keep things simple. I'm thinking, if I were a carp, where would I be? So I'm thinking, I'm looking for slack water. I'm looking for structure. And then of course I'm trying to read the water. If I'm seeing signs of carp feeding or bubbles here or there. But I think for the most part, I'm looking at that slack water, I'm looking at structure, and then I'm going to look for signs of carp in those areas.
Gotcha. Now, how often do you get to fish, Dan, now? You've got your rugby and family and everything. How often do you get to fish?
Yeah, when we're not in season, I can kind of manipulate my schedule some where I'm able to fish 3 or 4 times a week. I'd say right now I'm lucky to get out, once a week in the heat of rugby season. But we're coming up to the end of that right now. So hopefully I'll be able to get out in the water a little bit more coming up.
Awesome. And what about your approach with baits over here? Obviously the sport is getting more popular, so therefore there's more exposure to different types of baits and stuff. Are you a particle guy? Do you fish boilies and pop-ups, sort of Euro style, or what's your approach there?
I think starting out, it was, almost 100% particle. Trying, again, reading a bunch of articles, trying to filter through that lens of the majority of the articles I'm reading are coming from Europe, which, they've got a completely different, their carp are doing some completely different stuff than what ours are. Yeah. So started out with particle, and I've been trying to incorporate, boilies now into my baiting campaigns. Mm-hmm. Trying to throw the kitchen sink at them and trying to figure out what works. Always trying to adapt and change and trying to overcome at least what the fish are doing.
Yeah, some of the. Have you ever tried float fishing for them at all? I know you said yes how you caught your first carp with a worm when you're probably going for bluegill or something. But have you ever tried like the Euro style of float fishing for them?
So I got my first Waggler set of floats, and I have not even used them yet. Right. So I do like so I'm a hunter as well. Yeah. I hunt white-tailed deer and do a lot of waterfowl hunting. So I do like that aspect of I want to see the carp. I'm looking for them. I'm looking for places that they are, and gotcha. Whether that's throwing a float over top of them or dropping something right in front of their face. Yeah. That's the style that I prefer and feel like I'm most comfortable in. Yeah. So I have been fishing the bottom a lot as well. But yeah, I love I view myself as a hunter that has a rod and reel in his hands, and I'm trying to target them that way.
That actually brings up the question: Have you ever tried fly fishing for them? Because those fly anglers, you're watching them actually eat the fly. Have you ever tried that?
No, I haven't. And some of that is carp fishing is expensive for
it is. Any of the it ain't cheap.
Listeners out there that are. It could be cheap, but I don't think my wife would let me get involved into fly fishing for him, if I'm honest. So
that's funny.
That one might not happen for me, although it looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah. No, it is, I tell you. And the fly anglers that I do interviews with, I learned so much from them. Their watercraft is exceptional, because they have to, if we're approaching a water, we don't have to see the fish to fish for them. Like you said, we could read the water. You could be at the warm water discharge, look at some topography, and set a trap for where we think that they would be, or bait a spot to draw them in. Well, those fly anglers, they don't do that. They don't show up to a water and chuck a bunch of flies in, hoping that they're going to come. And you're never going to see a fly angler just. And this is so obvious, but it completely blew me away this last year when I realized that. And one of the chaps I was doing an interview with, it was like, look, we don't just blindly cast to a piece of water. We have to go and find the fish. We've got to find the fish and see the fish tailing or eating or something like that. Because if you get one shot. You get one shot with the fly. So you got to find the fish, and if it's outside of that kind of zone, you'll spook them, and then they'll swim off. But I never realized how much more work they actually have to put in until I spoke to a guy who'd walked about 7 miles one day for one chance that he blew, by his own admission. And he said I had to walk 7 miles back home, because that was it. And he lost that opportunity. So we've addressed a number of different approaches today. We've addressed a number of different approaches, virtually all fishing approaches so far, with the exception of one. And it's not what we anglers would even really relate to as fishing. It's more of a hunter's mentality. But it's really important because of the subject today that we address it. Now, you've got a really interesting story, Dan, that we're going to discuss. It's a very sensitive topic to most carp anglers, and I know that you and I have had conversations in the past about the merits of doing this interview. And it is my personal opinion that your personal courage in doing this interview can help many others possibly look at things from a different viewpoint, because you're an incredible angler. You've done so much for this in this last year, and you're a great advocate for the sport. You have a huge passion and love for the species, but it didn't start off that way for you. What I would like you to do is tell us in your own words and in your own time about your personal journey and the transformation that has occurred for you to become the angler that you are today. Because at one point in time, you used to be a bow fisherman, didn't you?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, it started out again, I tell that story of my senior year of high school. A few friends and I hooked into our first carp. And I think then I really did fall in love with the fish. The fight that I experienced on the rod and reel was like nothing I had ever experienced before. But I think out of an ignorance of how to target carp, we tried and failed a lot. We caught a lot of catfish, which again, I'm learning as I catch a lot of catfish now, that's pretty par for the course. But I think our approach, we weren't setting ourselves up to catch carp at the level that maybe I'm catching now. Yeah. And so I wouldn't say I ever fell out of love with the species, but there became, I think, as I grew up and started hanging around more outdoorsmen, I think the rhetoric that I heard was that carp was the enemy. Yeah. As we're out catching, nice sized bluegill and crappie and bass, I think there were folks chirping in my ear the entire time that, man, if you like catching those, you got to watch out for the carp because they're invasive and they're eating all of, the bluegill and bass and crappie eggs. So, and I really do think, Sean, that it was out of an ignorance in my head that I thought maybe some of my friends that were bow fishing for them or, bow hunting for them, that, man, if I got involved with that, I would be doing my state and my country some sort of favor deed. Right. Yeah. Some favor by shooting a carp here or there, which again, I think that was out of ignorance that I had that thought, but it really did, I think, come out of an innocence, if you can say that. I use that term, very lightly, delicately. There was an ignorance.
That's a naivety. Yeah. It's a naivety. Yeah.
And so I had a few friends that they would go out, and I think it originally started, they would go out during the spawn, when we see carp crashing on the water and, in the reed beds and, lily pads where you can see them on top of the water. And they were going out and shooting carp. And, I think as a hunter myself, I thought, wow, this is, a way for me to continue to shoot my bow. Right. That's not in the fall. And, got involved with a few friends and we would go out and hunt carp. And it started primarily, like I said, during the spawn, because we could see them, we could find them, we knew where they were at. Right. And then over time, I think as I got older and, had more time and a little more disposable income, that progressed to fishing, bow fishing for carp, I wouldn't say all year round, but, a much more extended period of time than just during the summer spawn.
And what ultimately was it for you, Dan, that got you to the point to where you said, I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't want to kill him anymore. I want to catch him. What was the thing that changed for you?
So I have, we live right here on the Maumee River up in Toledo, Ohio. And I have a boat. I have a bow fishing boat that I have rigged up with all the lights and everything that, we as carp anglers now read about and see and loathe. I was that guy. I had the boat with the generator and lights and all of that. So last May, I was firing up my boat, getting ready to go out. And I thought, I'm going to do a scouting mission. I went out in the daytime. I brought my bow with me. And I'm cruising up on a flat. And right in front of me, I saw the first fish that I saw was, probably still to this point, the largest fish that I have seen in the water. It was probably a 30-plus pound fish. And I drew back on it. And I really had this, fight in my head, man, why are you going to shoot this fish? What are you going to do with it? It's a 30-plus pound fish. That fish is old. Even me not knowing much about the age of carp, like I knew it was old. And so I had that struggle as I drew back on this fish and ultimately decided, I want to let this fish go, but I have to come back and get it with the rod and reel. I had that debate on my platform as I'm getting ready to shoot this fish and thought, I'm going to let it go, but I'm coming back for it, but with a hook, and I want to catch it right. And see this thing live out and hopefully get bigger, and maybe I'll get to catch it multiple times, or a friend would. So that was just a few, it was last May, almost a year to this point, last year, where I saw this and just said, I can't do it anymore. Yeah.
That's incredible, man, that you had that, you had that voice. There was something inside of you that fundamentally changed, because it's, I've yet to speak to an angler that's gone through that. And there's a couple of members that we have, that started off years ago as bow hunters, and you can never go back once you've made that change. Obviously, you don't go back, but it's incredible that you went through that. And it was your appreciation for that life, which is what it is, and quite, correctly stated. I mean, that fish could be 30 years old, probably 20 plus years old, and then there's the thought of, hey, the joy I could get of catching it and releasing it, and maybe catching it when it's a bit bigger and somebody else doing it as well, which is incredible and very admirable for you to have, to go through that. So what would you say, Dan, to a bow hunter now? I mean, because it's really not something that you can't make people change. People change because they want to, right? It's not something, I mean, it's pointless, when we see on these forums and people are, bashing this, that, and the other. And, I dislike it as much as anybody else, but you're not going to achieve anything that way. But what would you say to a bow hunter that shoots fish now? I mean, is there anything that you can say to them? Because it's a realization that they have to come to of their own finding at some point, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there's a lot that I would like to say. But I think ultimately it's going to be, they have to come to the realization on their own. I think all of us, we're kind of made for relationship. So I do think if you have a relationship with someone who is an avid bow fisherman, I think you're probably starting off on a better foot than just talking to someone that maybe you don't know or just encountered out on the bank one day.
Totally, yeah.
But I think it starts with relationship, and if you,
because you'll have relatable points, you would have relatable points of your experience that they can actually, they could relate to themselves. I mean, how could you encourage? I'd be interested in actually, what would you say if going through what you've gone through, and you may still have, I mean, you probably still have friends that that are bow hunters and stuff like that. But what would you say to them? What do you say to them? How do you approach them? How do you approach that subject? What would you say to them, Dan?
Yeah, I think when I had that debate go through my head where I just couldn't do it anymore, I think I would have been ill-equipped to explain that to anyone. But I do think that at the American Carp Society, you guys have done a great job for me, being so new, with some of the science behind carp, and whether that's on the ACS website or pointing carp anglers to scientific data. I think that's a good point. That's how I think maybe I would approach things, because I do think that it's an ignorance or that a lot of bow fishermen have. I can say that, right? Since I was one.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think you just as a point there, if the fact that, so do a lot of these guys bow fish because of that same misinformation about the science, that they think that the fish are hurting? Is that the reason why?
I would say every bow fisherman that I actively hunted with, bow hunted carp, that would be the rhetoric that they would say, that it was because they are a trash fish that is
right.
doing harm,
and they think it's doing harm to the resources and so on. Yeah. So if they actually saw proof that 90% of that is actual hogwash, which it is, and we have biologists and interviewed biologists, there's papers that have been written about it extensively and that type of thing. Do you I mean, would that alone, do you think, help to change their mind? Because obviously there's that hunter mentality thing. You know, they like hunting and shooting stuff. But do you think if there was that association with being a negative species, you think if that was that changed, then there'd be a little bit more reticent to actually do it then?
I mean, I think it opens the door possibly.
Yeah.
For that. And I do think, though, you know, I grew up in a family that hunted. We had, you know, chickens that were butchered, and, you know, my grandfather had rabbits that he butchered and sold for meat. And so I do think some of it is upbringing and kind of what you've grown up doing. Yeah. I think we see that with the carp as well. I mean, it carries a negative connotation, whether it's as a trash fish or, you know, only this person would fish for carp, or only that person would fish for carp. So I do think some of it is upbringing. I think science can help open the door, but I think until a carp angler is willing to kind of walk through that door to engage in those conversations with folks, I don't know if it's going to change much from us sitting on the sidelines or behind our keyboards.
No, it's not. That's not going to achieve anything, period, which is why we don't, I mean, at the American Carp Society, there's no point in having debates about it and bashing people, you know, for their beliefs and stuff. It's not going to help do it. I think that, I think exposing people to the real science and possibly exposing them to the benefits of catching them on a rod and line. I mean, because, you know, I was raised in the countryside. I've hunted. You know, I was raised shooting pheasant and duck for the table when I was a boy. You know, I was raised clay pigeon shooting, fishing in the countryside. And then, you know, the pheasant that I shot, my mother would prepare it for the table, and, you know, it's great. Most hunters that I know, you know, when they hunt deer or when they hunt for the table. They hunt for food. They don't they don't shoot something and just leave it there and let it rot to death. You know, so there's usually a bigger sort of picture behind it. So I think that combination of education and also generational things will change. I mean, because there's young kids coming into it now that think, I mean, a lot of the young fly anglers, I mean, it's as cool for them as skateboarding is. It's cool. It's cool to fish for carp on the fly. If you're a young fly angler coming into it, because they fight like hell, and, you know, they're in your backyard and everything. So like most things with generational bias and that type of thing, obviously can change. I mean, do you still keep in touch with those guys? Do you have conversations with them about the subject? You know, have you managed to bring any of them over to the dark side, so to speak?
So I am in conversation with some of those guys still, and I think we have a genuine, you know, mutual respect for the way we choose to spend our time in the outdoors. But I haven't been able to bring anybody over to our side since, and which is, it's a bummer. I would love to continue to be able to, I mean, that's part of the fun of carp fishing, is the communal aspect of getting to do it.
That's exactly. Yeah.
I would love to be able to sit on a bank with some of those guys again and have great conversations. But I just think at this point, maybe in their angling journey, they're not ready to even.
They're not there. Yeah. They're just not there, Dan. That's all there is. And having been on both sides, you know, it's really only somebody like yourself that can have that conversation with them. I mean, because I could have the conversation with them, or somebody that's knowledgeable with the fact could have the conversation with them, but that's not going to resonate like somebody like, you know, yourself that said, well, I actually used to be a bow fisherman, you know, and here's the reason why. Because then it goes to another level, doesn't it? It gets to another, it really gets in there for them, and it's a reality for them then. I mean, especially some freak like me with a different accent and stuff like that. But it gets to then it would really get to another, you know, another level for them then. Because I know when you first came in and applied for membership, to the American Carp Society. Clayton Wine and I, we have many discussions before we kind of initially, because we do a background search on everybody. We go to the Facebook pages, we look at their social media, and we kind of see where they're at. And Clayton, bless him, I mean, he's like Sherlock Holmes when he goes through all of this stuff. So he came back with a bunch of stuff, and then I remember us having conversations, and because I think I sent you a couple of texts or a couple of DMs and messages and stuff, and it was like, it was great because you generally had and you can tell it's not something that you can fake. You can see somebody if they're trying to fake, oh, I'm really passionate about catching carp. Do you know what I mean? If they're not. And you had a genuine, huge passion for it, which obviously is played out and with everything that you've been doing. So it's a great journey that you've come through, Dan, and to get to that other side now. And I think you're a natural coach anyway, like you said, with the rugby and that type of thing. So you just never know how many other lives you could potentially change or help just by introducing them to the fish. You'd be a natural for that. So those are some other things we can discuss there in the future. So do you have do you have any venues in the USA? Because of social media now, we hear about lots of different venues all over the USA. Do you have any venues that you haven't fished for, that you haven't fished at yet, that you'd like to visit or that you'd like to try format?
Yeah, I think, like you said, because of social media, I've been hearing about a lot of fun places. I grew up as a kid going to Dale Hollow and never once dreamt about catching a carp there. And then I get involved in, carp angling, and I guess that's the place to be. So I'd love to get back there. Yeah. And then, I going up the Northeast sounds really fun too. I haven't caught a fantail before, and there's just something about
there's a bunch in the Connecticut River.
It sounds like a fun place to go. I might be able to convince my wife to go up there with me too. There's
a bunch in there. The fly anglers, they've done a great job, specifically through social media. I think even more so than the traditional anglers over the past sort of few years. Even though we're seeing now, with a lot of emphasis on photography and the presentation of the fish and that type of thing. How do you think social media has affected the growth? I mean, obviously we've got Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, that type of thing. You can access now everything, and I think over this last year during the pandemic, that's one of the things we were all grateful for. I mean, we were, all stuck in the house. You can watch some incredible footage of some incredible anglers with incredible documentation from all parts of the world and just lose yourself in the screen. How do you think it's played a part in the sport over here, Dan? You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, my wife is much smarter than I am, and she's like, if you get a chance to talk about something good that's happened from the pandemic, like it brought me out, and I found a new love for carp angling, and I attribute that to not being able to be around people so I could go out and fish. And I fell in love fishing for carp, and then it led me down the rabbit hole of, social media, which led me to you guys and, opened up, I think, Pandora's box of, learning from this guy or this girl or these kids and seeing, what they're doing on social media. So I think it's a great tool. But I think also it can also become the comparison. You could play the comparison game. Right. I've heard it said that, comparisons kind of, it steals the joy. It's the thief of all joy. So I think as you look at what other people are catching and your fish are 10 to 20 pounds lighter than that. And, oh man, that can become a problem.
Yeah, I think that happens more. I got to tell you, I think that happens more when you're younger. As you get older, the mere fact that you can get out and catch anything is an absolute blessing. So you're not so worried so much about it. I think that obviously there are positives and negatives, in both. I think for the most part, in fact, American Carp Society members, period, are incredible with what they have done to help the membership with new anglers that come in and the encouragement and the help that they give and everybody, helping each other, because we don't stand, we don't stand for any nonsense in the organization for members and stuff, which I honestly genuinely think that they do appreciate, because there's a place where they can feel comfortable sharing their experiences and that type of thing with other anglers that are, that are of the like mind. What was it for you about the American Carp Society that actually made you want to join, Dan? What was it?
I think you guys were, for one, I mean, you were the first group that I found.
Right.
And then I think things were done, on your website and social media in a way that was simple enough and I'm using myself as the dummy here, simple enough for a dummy to learn and be able to latch onto, but then also deep enough and advanced enough that, the intro stuff that you guys are showing and people in the ACS is great. But then, man, there's a wealth of knowledge. If you want to dive deeper, there's places there to do that. And then I think everything looks nice, which is opened up, the photography side. I've never once in my life wanted to take pictures and take them well. But now for some reason I'm wanting to take multiple takes of these fish and
there you go.
Make them look well and edit
it
them.
Worked. It worked.
Oh yeah, it's great. And I think
that's great, man.
Working with high schoolers, for what I do, I think the appeal, it looks nice when you're scrolling through your feed. I think it will attract a younger generation as well as they see this and see how the fish is presented and cared for in a way that is, beautiful. I think we can draw in the younger generation as well.
I think so too. And I think you hit upon something, and we're definitely seeing that because we have a lot of young members that get involved. I was just speaking to a chap yesterday who was in his early 20s. He's only really been fishing for him for a year. Guy's a monster angler. Malik, I just did an interview with him. And here's a great example of, not having you don't have to have the most up-to-date gear. I mean, the guys out there is just die hard, and getting those young anglers, as you said, into it, and having them experience it, because as an angler, Dan, as well as anybody else, when you first start fishing for a fish, there is no bias involved. When you first go as a kid to fish, you want to catch the biggest, baddest fish in that lake type of thing. You don't have a bias on, native or non-native or whatever that, the narrative of it may be. And it's just that mystery. And I think also our members have done a really good job. And the message that we portray is to try to capture some of that mystery and magic and share that with other anglers, because that's that unidentifiable kind of piece of magic fairy dust that carp angling has, that as wonderful as all the other species are, I haven't seen that kind of fanaticism, let's say in trout anglers or catfish anglers or something like that. I'm sure there is, but there is definitely something special about it. Now, have you, through your journey, would you say, are there any anglers that have been a big influence on you as you've kind of gone through your carp angling journey? Because now with access to social media, I mean, you get access to anglers from all over the world, and it could obviously be somebody local, but I wanted to ask you that question, if there's been anybody that has been a big influence on you, either collectively or an individual or anything like that.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, like you said, we can see everybody. So I'm gleaning information from all people. But when it comes to influences, Sean, I would say that for me is all built on relationships. And so there have been guys that I've got to share the bank with and have conversations with that, oh man, like they have influenced me in tons of ways. I fish with my neighbor now. I got him involved into carp angling, Danny Stutz, and we're best of friends, and the time that we get to share on the bank has been great for us. And sometimes we'll take our kids and our wives and they'll play on the playground, and we've got some rods in the water. And relationships are huge for me. There's a few other guys, Bobbioni and bench shiflet that we've got a chance to fish together. They're, you know, kind of in Southern Ohio, and those guys, it's been fun to get to fish with them. And then there's another guy overseas that, for some reason, as luck would have it, we met on social media, John Lamb, and we've been talking a bunch. And he's a good guy, and oh man, he's a lot of fun too. And he's doing some neat things, you know, over in England, which has been fun to get to.
Yeah, he is. He's a funny chap, isn't he? He's a funny guy. He is. He's got a good sense of humor and stuff on him. We
have a good soccer and rugby rivalry. We trying to pull each other over the dark side on that one.
Dan, thank you so much for your testimony, brother. You know, your honesty and putting all of this out there is something that many could learn from. I really appreciate you going into the details and stuff about it, and that personal journey that you went through, that moment in time where things changed. And I'm glad for us, the rest of us carp anglers, that you did, because you're a wonderful advocate for the sport, great ambassador for the sport, great carp angler. And I'm hoping at some point in time in the not near future that we'll be able to get together and share the bank together. So I do appreciate you coming on here.
Well, thanks for having me. I would love to get to fish with you sometime, Sean. And if anyone's having thoughts or questions or wants to delve into maybe what a bow fisherman is thinking, feel free to reach out. I would love to try to help or have conversations with folks as it warrants and makes sense.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, that's about all we have time for today. I'd like to thank our guest, Dan Ketterman, for all of his help and time with this. If any of you have questions for Dan, obviously he can be reached through the American Carp Society, our members Facebook group. But outside of that, Dan, what is the best way for somebody to get hold of you, bud?
You can find me on Facebook, Dan Ketterman, or on Instagram at Black Swamp Carp.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back here the same time, same place 2 weeks from now, so don't forget to join us. You can reach out to us here at the American Carp Society through Facebook and Instagram, Pinterest and Twitter. Tag us with your captures with hashtag American Carp Society and hashtag Join the Guilty Ones, and we will feature you on the feed. You can contact me directly with any questions at Sean@AmericanCarpSociety.com. Be lucky.